Okay, good afternoon, Frogmore. This is a video on percentages aimed at my year 8s, but really this could work for anyone in the school. So we have got finding percentage of amounts without a calculator, increasing, decreasing percentages without a calculator, finding percentages of amounts and increasing, decreasing percentages, so all this but with a calculator, then compound interest and reverse percentages, which are a lot trickier. Okay, so let's start with let's get this all in. So finding percentages of amounts, and this is no calculator. So let's say we're starting with 80 and we want to find 10% of that. Now, 10% is one of the easiest ones to go straight to. We just do that 80 divided by 10. In fact, I'll squeeze that 80 in to make it really clear. 80 divided by 10. To find 10%, we divide by 10. And there's our answer. Now, do not be fooled to be thinking that to find 20%, we divide by 20. Okay, I'll just show you quickly why 10% is divided by 10. If we've got 100%, which is the original amount, we divide that by 10. 100 divided by 10 is 10%. That's why it works. So 100% divided by 20 would actually find us 5%, not 20%. So, but we're not going to do it that way anyway, but that's just to make sure you realise that's why you can divide by 10. So, to find 20%, we're going to take the 10% we've already found and double it, times it by 2. So we double that and we end up with 16, because 20% is double 10%. And you can find 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, 80% and 90% all using this way. So 10% to get to 70, well, there's 7 of them, 7 10% in that. So we do 7 lots of whatever 10% was, which in this case, of course, is 8. So that's 56. Okay. Just a quick note on 5%. You may realise that you could just half 10% to get that. 4. There are slightly more long-winded way by finding 1% and timesing it by 5. But I just thought I'd put that one in as a little mention. Right. 1%. So this is going to help us with harder percentages like this. 3%, 73%, 82%, whatever. We found 10% by dividing 100 by 10. To go from 10% to 1%, we're going to divide that by 10. Okay, so to find 1%, you divide by 10 to get the 10%, and then divide by another 10 to get the 1%. So you do 8 divided by 10, which is 0.8. Okay? 3% now suddenly we can find because we're just going to triple that 1%. 3 lots of 0.8 is actually 2.4. Okay? Now 73%, we could do 1% times 73, but there's an easier way. If we want 73%, let's use what we already know. 70% we worked out earlier by doing 10% times 7, that's 56. 3% we did 1% times 3, 2.4. So we can combine that and that, 70 plus 3% and 73%, 58.4. And that'll work for whatever you want. So if you want 82%, you could find 80% by doing 10% times 8. And you could find 2% by working out 1% and then doubling that. And then whatever these two things are, add them together to get our 82%. Okay? Right. Next bit. Increasing, decreasing. Short and sweet, this one, hopefully. So I've already showed you how to find 10% of 80, for example. So 80 divided by 10 is 8. Let's say they didn't want you to find 10%. They actually wanted you to increase that 80 that in there, by 10%. Now, increase just means add it onto the original amount. So we've got the 10% is 8. We've got the original 80. Okay, we're going to add 8 to that, and that gives us 88. So increase is just add it on. Decrease, I'm sure you worked it out. Start with the 80, this time take away the 8, 72. So decrease, just take away. That's increasing and decreasing by percentages without a calculator. Right. Percentages, find, increase, decrease with a calculator. Now this is going to be working with something we call multipliers. So, find 10% of 80. We have been dividing by 10, but we're actually going to try and multiply by something. What's the same as dividing by 10? Timesing by what? It's actually the same as timesing by 0.1. Now, I'm going to actually write that as 0.10 because a lot of people think of this as 10%. If you want to use a multiplier, we just multiply by the decimal equivalent of 10%. Okay, which is 0.1. We don't need that 0.1, you don't need that 0 in there, but a lot of people just see it as that there. Okay, so if we want to find 27%, we times by 0.27. You just check these in a calculator and you'll find it. I mean, that one we know is obviously 8. Okay, increase by 30%. Now, if we were just trying to find 30%, we'd just be timesing by 0.3 or 0.30. But increasing by 30%, we times by 1.30. And you might be thinking, well, why is that though? Well, I'll show you. Increasing by 30% is the same as if we had, let's write a note down here, 100%. We increase it by 30. That gives us 130%. So increasing by 30% is the same as finding 130%, which I'm going to do just here. 80 times the equivalent of 130%, divide 130% by 100, we get 1.30. Okay, so these two things identical. Increase by 30%, find 130%. Same thing. So sometimes when I get a question, increase 80 by 30%, I'm then just in brackets here writing find 130%. And that just helps me to remember, right, I've got times by that. Decreasing, well, if you've got 100% and you take away 17%, that's the same as finding 83%, because you do 100, take away 17, which is 83%. Right, so we do 80 and we times by 0.83. So just quick sort of some examples. If we want to find 12%, then our multiplier is we times it by 0.12. If we want to find 23%, what do you think that's going to be? Yep, 0.23. If we want to find 141%, times by 1.41, which of course, if I wanted to increase by 41%, that's exactly the same. I'm just going to add one more on. What if we wanted to find 2.3%? Okay, if we want to find 2.3%, actually 0. Well, that's your 10, so no, not there. If you're dividing that by 100, that should be 0.023. Okay, so a quick example there. Right, compound interest. Start with £200. So I'm actually going to start with a common mistake people make. £200, they work out what 10% is. Okay, so that's £20. 10% is 20. For 2 years, they just simply double it. And you get 200 plus the 40, £240. Now that's wrong. That's actually simple interest. And the reason that's wrong for compound interest is because compound interest, compound interest is, we'll look at interest on interest. Okay, so in the first year, 10% would just be £20. But then you'd have £220, and you would then increase that by 10%. Now 10% of that's no longer 20. It's now 10% is 22. So when you add that on, you're going to get £242. So you can see, okay, why that's wrong. Okay, it's correct for simple interest, but we're not doing any of that today. We're looking at compound interest. Over here, so this is same question. I'm going to make sure we do it properly. Start with £200. We're actually going to use the multipliers we learned a minute ago to help us out here. If I times it by 1.10 or 1.1, that's increasing by 10%. I want to do it for 2 years, so I want to do it again. So I'm going to write times it by 1.10. And if you had to do it for 10 years, you just write it again and again and again until you get to 10 of these. However, there is a quicker way. I'm going to write 200 times 1.10 squared, because that's the same as this. So you'll always write the number of years in the power here. This will always be your multiplier. So if it's increased by 10%, it's 1.10. If it's increased by 3%, it'll be 1.03, whatever. And this will always be your starting money. Okay, so this one here, £350 is what you start with. I'm going to use a multiplier of 1.03 for my interest rate of 3%. And it's 6 years, so I'm going to write to the power 6. And then I stick that on a calculator, and whatever that is, that's my answer. Okay, very last one. Reverse percentages, and almost definitely the hardest one. Right, this is a top, nice t-shirt there in the 30% off sale. Okay, so it's now just £28. Find the original price. Now, a lot of people will work out 30% of this and add it on, okay, or take it off. But it's the original price we want. And actually, that means that this £28 here is not 100% of the value, okay? It's actually 70% of the value because, of course, this is 30% off the original. Whenever they say the original price, that's when you know you're going to be dealing with reverse percentages. So I'm going to pretend that I knew what I was starting with. Okay, that's my starting cost. That's my original price. Of course, it doesn't have anything in at the moment because I don't really know what it is. I'm then going to think, what would I do with a multiplier to get 30% off? And that is 30% off 100% is 70%. To find 70%, I times by 0.7 or 0.70, and that gets me my answer. Now, my answer, of course, is £28. Now, I'm going to think, right, if I had this, I'd times by 0.70 to get 28. So how do I get back? How do I go reverse? How do I do the inverse of multiplying by 0.70? How do I reverse that percentage? And of course, the opposite to times is divide. 0.70. I put 28 divided by 0.70 in my calculator, 0.70, and I would get £40 in that case. The next one, original, I would multiply. So this is a car. Depreciate, by the way, is a fancy way of saying decrease in value by 20%. So that means I would have times by 0.80. Okay. To get £4,000. So I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to divide by 0.80. Okay, and if you put that in your calculator, you get £5,000. So my answer is £5,000. Okay, what's important here is increasing by 10% and then decreasing by 10%. They're not opposite to each other. Okay, because I think a lot of people think, all right, well, if this was 30% off, I just need to add 30%. If this was 20% decrease, I just need to increase by 20%. Okay, 20% of £4,000 is 800. That does not get us back to that. So you've got to, if they ever mention reverse percentages, original price, anything like that, divide. Okay, right, thanks a lot, guys. See you later.